Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of RE156, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Human Trauma, written by Syed Ice King. Elder's four pointed tips at the end of his segmented legs clicked softly. It was difficult to be quiet when your exoskeleton was hard against a metal floor. Human John sat at the mess room table with his back to the slowly approaching creature. The Human John had not been the same since returning from the last planet-side excursion. Elder had seen Human John in combat before, exemplary. But Human John had been a human soldier prior to life on the ship, so it was not surprising. However, Human John had never been like this before. Why should this planet-side mission have been different? There had been some combat, what Human John had called an ambush, but everyone survived. Maybe his friend just needed something funny to happen, so Elder took it upon himself to prank his friend. Human John loved pranks and had taught Elder some of them. Maybe this would fix his mood. Elder slowed even more, his feet no longer making any sound as they were lowered carefully onto the floor. Human John sat completely still, a caffeine mug in his one hand and the other resting on his lap. The mug gave off no residual heat, which seemed odd until Elder realized that it was most likely just empty. Elder was close behind Human John now. He raised himself up to his full height, with what could be called a smile on his face. A good scare always brought a round of laughter afterwards. This would help his friend, he was sure. As he opened his mouth, a familiar human voice yelled from across the mess room, "Elder, no, stop!" Elder already started to let the loud roar come out, though, and couldn't stop to wonder why there was so much panic in the human Sam's tone. Human John turned quickly. He did not look at Elder, but in a curious way he seemed to look through Elder, as if he were looking at something far away. Or maybe he was deep in thought, as humans sometimes were. Maybe he needed to be brought back to what was happening in the present. Then Elder felt a great deal of confusion and empathetic pain from his chemical receptors as they focused on Human John and his excretions. Human John's scent was a chaotic bouquet of fear, hate, confusion, and other emotions, and those feelings assailed Elder and overwhelmed his senses. At which point, Human John's real onslaught began. The caffeine mug whopped around and crashed against Elder's face, cold caffeine drink spilling over Elder's shell. Elder's visual organs instinctively shielded themselves, his mind perfectly remembering every detail of the room around him as he could no longer see. Human John's eyes had been red and veiny, tears welled at the edges. But his mouth was frozen in a feral snarl, as though he were about to bite at Elder. Human John's clothes were unkempt, and he looked dirty and unwell. Something was very wrong with Elder's friend. A neuter concussion slammed against the abdomen plate, then a second, and a third followed. Elder's top arm snapped shut where he thought Human John's head was, crying out that he was attempting to kill his friend who was trying to kill him. He met only air, though, and tried again and again in quick succession, lowering his arms each time, hunting for Human John to stop the attack. A fourth and fifth concussive blow cracked Elder's shell, and an echoing pain resounded through his soft tissues underneath his armor. He opened the carapace guarding his visual organs out of sheer will, just in time to see Human John, still snarling and crying, crouched and pulling a knife from his boot, eyes focused on the broken part of Elder's defensive skin. "John, stop!" Human Sam flew over the table and slammed into him with all of her momentum. "Elder, just run!" she managed to yell, as she wrestled with Human John. As Elder scurried away in a hurry, he heard her words from behind him. "John, it's me. It's Sam. You're okay. We're back on the ship. Look at me." Elder was too far away already to hear any more. John had been confined to quarters for 2 weeks, and Sam was doing her best to make sure he wasn't tried as a criminal before the ship court. She finally brokered a meeting between herself, Elder, whom she insisted be present, the ship captain, and the head of security, who claims his own right to be there in best protection of the ship. Elder was molted, embarrassed, and confused. He shifted in all directions, keeping his muscles moving to attempt to maintain whatever heat production he could without his insulated shell. The securities captain oscillated back and forth in what Sam knew was pent-up frustration. The ship's captain sat completely still between them. Sam looked at Elder and emphatically began what she knew would be a long and intense meeting. "Elder, even if those two hadn't agreed to this meeting, I would have sought a personal communication with you, in order for me to explain to you, the victim, at the very least what happened."
"There is nothing to explain."
The securities captain let out some of what Sam knew was overwhelming anger. "I requested this briefing and was allowed it, so clearly I think there is. Now there is a lot to explain. Please keep the interruptions or any questions for the end, and I'll speak on what I can." The securities captain stilled and Sam continued. "Elder, John is overcome with sorrow and wishes me to pass his sincerest apologies." The security captain stood suddenly.
"Then why did he attack and attempt to kill?"
he yelled, pointing a sharpened claw accusingly at Sam. "Shut your mouth!" She slammed a hand on the table. After John's show of force, even her slight outburst pressed fear into those at the table. Elder jumped back. The securities captain bared all 4 arm limbs, and the ship's captain stood. "I'm sorry for that," she gathered herself again. "John gave me permission to tell you the entirety of what happened and why, something that was not easy for him to do. With this trust he gave to me, I will advocate as fiercely as I need to in order for you to understand what he's going through. Please allow me to tell the story without interrupting, and hopefully, by the end, you'll be able to understand. John was and is afflicted and couldn't control himself." The 3 chittered to themselves for a moment, concerned over the revelation. Had human John gone mad? Would he attack more people if he were non-stop? Had something taken over his body, making him literally unable to control himself? Do humans go feral? They didn't know how to react, and their fearful conversation in their native language built into a crescendo until Sam cut through their crosstalk. Before he was a traveler, John was a soldier. I'm sure you know that, and I'm sure that it's one of the reasons you accepted his request to join us here. What you may not know, though, is that he was a part of a war we humans had against a species that attempted to colonize one of our planets. He was on that hostile planet for 18 of our Earth months, which is shy of 2 intergalactic years. I know many spacefaring species think we, humans that is, are the perfect soldiers and are built for battle and everything, but there is something most of those species don't know about us, even though we're good at it. Being soldiers hurts us, especially if we do it for a long time or in specifically intense situations. The planet that John was on, he was not supposed to have been there as long as he was. His people, his fellow soldiers, and a few of the native civilians got cut off from the main rescue force by the enemy and became trapped for a long time. They fought, killed, and died in horrible ways for 6 months. When they were finally rescued, there was only a fraction of the original group of people. John was in charge and had more than once made a decision that cost lives. After that, he turned in his tags and walked away. He joined with us a few years later. When we went down to the last planet, however, many weeks ago that was, something happened. Alden, I'm sure that you can tell the captain what it is more specifically, but the short version is there was an attack that was unexpected. When that happened, John's brain was reminded of his time on that horrid planet, and it opened his old wound. See, when humans make memories like John did in those 18 months, they're not normal memories. It's more than that, something worse. And when reminded of those memories, some very bad things can happen. It's like when your shell gets damaged and there's a piece that isn't seated properly anymore. It's irritating and painful. At that point, however, you would just remove that piece of the shell and repair it. When it's a wound in the human's mind, we cannot get rid of it. The pain is there forever. When you saw him, Alder, that morning in the mess hall, he hadn't slept more than an hour a night for days. He was having something we call flashbacks, which is when a human's brain doesn't know it's not in the place the memory happened. He thought he was back in those jungles, trapped in mines and hills, waiting to be torn apart by monsters. When he turned and saw you, his brain told him that you were there to kill him, and he fought as he fought then, with everything he had. It wasn't the friend Human John you knew that morning. It was the soldier who thought that he was fighting a war. I'd been there, trying to help as much as I could, but there was little to do. His mind, though not broken, is injured. There is no way to heal this injury, though. When it happens, you just wait for it to scab over and then hope to never break it open again. Sam sat back down and waited. No one spoke, no one moved. They just processed. Having a dislodged piece of armor stuck and poking sounds uncomfortable. Being unable to then remove it for the rest of one's life, however, sounds absolutely unbearable. I didn't know humans could be afflicted in such a way. The ship's captain's quiet words were bolstering to Sam, who had been worried that they would not understand at all. That metaphor, at least, had made sense to them. It's something we only talk about to those we are very emotionally close to, and only when we absolutely must. Sam looked away, and Alda noticed the same look in her eyes that Human John had when he was attacked, as though she were looking far away and at something else. Was she also afflicted? Suddenly, she was focused again on the ship's captain's eyes. "Elder, what do you think?" the ship's captain asked. There was no immediate answer. The elder shifted around more, keeping warm and thinking to himself. "Human John is my friend, and has been there for me in times of need, including during dangerous situations. I believe he is sick and cannot be held completely accountable. We should do what we can for him, to see that he is as strong mentally as he can be. I would like to personally assist if possible." Sam smiled brightly. "That would make him very happy, Alda, and when you feel ready, he would like to see you to pass along his apologies personally." She beamed at him. "I will do that, but maybe I'll wait for my shell to be repaired." She laughed and stood to tell John the news. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Drexzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.